Archaeologists in Britain say they've made an astonishing find. They believe they've uncovered the remains of long-lost royalty. He happens to be King Richard III.
In 2014, scientists dug up a parking lot and found a king. It was the discovery of the century. They found the curved spine. They found the battle wounds. They matched the DNA to his sister's line. The world cheered. But here is the catch. They ran a second test. A test that was supposed to be a victory lap. Instead, it exposed a 500-year-old lie. The 2025 files are finally out, and they prove that the king in the car park was hiding a secret that destroys the entire history of the British crown. Bones beneath the concrete. The secrets Richard III took to his grave as his final resting place is revealed. In 2014, a DNA test proved the skeleton under the parking lot was King Richard III. But a second test, one on the male Y chromosome, failed. It was a total mismatch. This pointed to a massive scandal, but the world was told it was an unsolved mystery. Yeah, about that. New 2025 findings have blown that mystery wide open, revealing the original discovery was even more disturbing than anyone dared to admit. The truth isn't just a simple case of infidelity, it is a lie that defined centuries of royal power. The Leicester miracle. It sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. A king is buried under a parking lot. For 527 years, that is where the story of King Richard III ended. He was the last English king to perish on the battlefield. Struck down at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. He was the final king of the Plantagenet dynasty, and his demise marked the end of the brutal decades-long Wars of the Roses. His victorious enemies, the Tudors, led by the new King Henry VIII, wanted to make an example of him. They paraded his unclothed body slung over a horse through the streets of Leicester. It was the ultimate act of humiliation, a message to all of England. This dynasty is over. After that, he was given a simple burial in a simple grave at a church known as Grey Friars. But here is the catch. History moves on. Just a few decades later, during the Reformation, the church was torn down. Its stones were carted away. Its land was sold, paved over, and repurposed. Within a few generations, the exact location of the king's grave was lost. It just vanished. Legends sprang up claiming his bones were dug up by a mob and thrown into the nearby River Soar. He was, for all intents and purposes, completely lost to history. Remembered mostly as the monstrous, deformed villain in Shakespeare's famous play. That is, until a screenwriter named Philippa Langley had a hunch. She became obsessed with Richard, not as the monster, but as the man. She felt the historical accounts were nothing but Tudor propaganda. She spent years poring over ancient dusty maps, trying to overlay the old city of Leicester with the new modern one. Her research kept pointing to a most undignified spot, a drab asphalt city council parking lot. It sounds crazy, right? Everyone thought it was a fantasy, a total waste of time and money. She was told repeatedly that he was in the river, that the grave was destroyed, that she was chasing a ghost. But she convinced the University of Leicester to take a chance. In August of 2012, they broke ground. They cut a neat trench about 6 feet wide and 50 feet long right through the asphalt, digging into the hard clay below. The media called it a wild goose chase. But on the very first day of the dig, they found human leg bones. It was a stunning start, but it could have been anyone. This was, after all, a church graveyard. The team carefully, painstakingly brushed away centuries of dirt, and a story began to emerge from the earth. The skeleton, officially named Skeleton 1, was found in a grave that was crudely dug and, get this, too short for the body. This forced the head into an awkward, propped-up position. This was not the burial of a beloved monarch, it was the hasty, disrespectful work of his enemies. The skeleton belonged to a man in his early 30s. Richard was 32 when he met his end. The bones themselves were riddled with injuries, 10 of them in total. 8 were to the skull. This wasn't a random arrow. This suggested a brutal personal attack after his helmet was lost or removed in the chaos of battle. 2 of these head wounds were massive, either of which would have been fatal. One was a sharp force trauma to the base of the skull, likely from a sword. Another was a horrifying puncture from a halberd, a long polearm weapon that went straight through the top of his head. This wasn't just a man who perished in battle. This was a king who was surrounded, unhorsed, and finished off in a frenzy. But the real aha moment, the detail that made the archaeologists' hearts pound, was the spine. The skeleton had a severe twisting curve, a condition called adolescent-onset scoliosis. For centuries, Richard III had been famously depicted by Tudor propaganda as a poisonous hunchback toad. The bones proved this was a vicious exaggeration, but it was rooted in a real medical condition. The curvature was so pronounced it would have made his right shoulder sit noticeably higher than his left. This single anatomical feature matched historical descriptions perfectly. Later analysis of the teeth and bones using a technique called isotope analysis revealed a diet rich in seafood and wine, the kind of expensive food only a high-status individual could afford in the 15th century. Everything was pointing to one unbelievable conclusion. They had found him. Still, this was all just strong circumstantial evidence. To be 100% sure, they needed something more powerful. They needed to read the story written in his genetic code, but the DNA was about to reveal a secret no one saw coming. The barcode of history. With the skeleton of a potential king lying in their lab, scientists at the University of Leicester faced a huge challenge. Getting usable DNA from bones that have been in the ground for over 500 years is incredibly difficult. And that is putting it lightly. Ancient DNA degrades over time. It shatters, breaking into tiny, fragmented pieces like a priceless vase dropped on a concrete floor. Even worse, it is easily contaminated by the DNA of everyone who handles it. We are talking a single skin cell, a sneeze, or a stray hair from an archaeologist. The team, led by geneticist Dr. Turi King, had to work in sterile, clean room conditions. They wore full protective gear, looking more like astronauts than historians. They carefully drilled into the king's tooth and a dense leg bone, the femur. These are the best places to find preserved genetic material locked away from the elements. Their goal was simple: find a living relative and see if the DNA matched. So, here is the deal. Most of our DNA, the stuff that decides our eye color and height, gets shuffled with every generation. It is a mix from mom and dad and their moms and dads. It is useless for tracing a specific line over centuries. But there are two exceptions. The first is mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. What most people do not realize is that mtDNA is passed down only from a mother to all her children. Your father's mtDNA stops with him. This means your mtDNA is identical to your mother's, and your mother's is identical to her mother's, and so on. It is a perfect family signature passed down the maternal line almost unchanged through thousands of years. Richard III had no surviving children. His only legitimate son, Edward of Middleham, perished young. But Richard had an older sister, Anne of York. Genealogists, led by the historian John Ashdown Hill, worked for years on a staggering feat of historical detective work. They traced Anne of York's female lineage from her to her daughter, to her daughter's daughter, and so on for 17 generations, all the way to the present day. They finally found two living descendants. One was Michael Ibsen, a Canadian-born furniture maker living in London. The other was Wendy Doldig, a distant cousin. They both agreed to give DNA samples, swabbing their cheeks for science. The lab then began the painstaking process of extracting the fragmented mtDNA from the 500-year-old skeleton. They had to piece it together, clean it of contamination, and then compare it to the modern, clean mtDNA from Michael Ibsen. When the results came back, the team had their answer. It was a perfect match. The mitochondrial DNA from skeleton 1 was identical to Michael Ibsen's. The specific type of mtDNA they shared, known as haplogroup J, is actually quite rare, found in only a tiny fraction of the European population. The odds of this being a coincidence were astronomical. The archaeological evidence, the battle wounds, the scoliosis, and now the genetic proof. It was a slam dunk. In February 2013, the University of Leicester announced to the world the skeleton in the car park was beyond any reasonable doubt King Richard III. The mystery was solved. The world celebrated. But the scientists weren't done. They had another test to run, and this one would blow the whole story wide open. They decided to look at the second type of special DNA, the Y chromosome. This is the piece of DNA passed exclusively from father to son, just as mDNA is passed from mother to child. It is what makes a male male, and it also acts as a paternal family signature. In theory, Richard III's Y chromosome should match that of other men descended from his male line ancestors. The team tracked down living male line relatives of Henry Somerset, the 5th Duke of Beaufort. These men were known documented descendants of King Edward III, who was Richard's great-great-grandfather. If the Y chromosomes matched, it would be the final glorious piece of the puzzle. The samples were tested, the data was analyzed, and the results were a total, complete 100% mismatch. They did not match at all. Not even close. The king's paternal DNA line was broken. Somewhere in the 19 generations separating Richard III from his modern-day relatives, someone's father wasn't who the history book said he was. This wasn't just a genetic anomaly, it was the hard scientific proof of a hidden royal scandal. The DNA proved a lie. But the question was, who told the lie that broke the dynasty? The smoking gun. The Y chromosome results sent a shockwave through the historical community. It wasn't just a mismatch, it was a genetic impossibility. The DNA was telling a story of a false paternity event, which is the polite scientific term for infidelity, somewhere in the royal family tree. What many overlooked at the time is that this wasn't just palace gossip from beyond the grave. It had enormous earth-shattering implications. The entire claim of the Plantagenet kings to the throne, the very thing they fought and perished for in the Wars of the Roses, was based on an unbroken line of succession from father to son. This bloodline they claimed was ordained by God. This DNA proved that the bloodline, the very foundation of their power, was not pure. The most shocking fact is this discovery meant that at some point a noble woman had a child with someone other than her husband, and that child was raised as a legitimate heir, altering the course of English history. So where did the break happen? That was the multi-million-dollar question, and here is where the revision in our title comes in. The 2014 research paper published in the prestigious journal Nature Communications was scientifically brilliant. But when it came to this explosive finding, the team was careful, and that is putting it lightly. They presented two main possibilities. Possibility 1, the break in the Y chromosome line happened after Richard III, meaning it occurred somewhere in the long 500-year line of Somerset descendants, the modern-day Dukes of Beaufort. This was the safe explanation. It would mean Richard's own line was legitimate, but one of the Somersets down the line was not. It would be a minor scandal for a noble family, but it wouldn't rewrite the history of the crown. It would be a historical footnote. But then there was possibility 2, the explosive one. The break happened before Richard III. This would mean that Richard, his brothers, including King Edward IV or his father, were not the biological sons of their supposed fathers. If this were true, it would mean Richard III himself had no legitimate blood claim to the throne he fought and perished for. And get this, it would also mean his brother, King Edward IV, the father of the famous princes in the Tower, was also illegitimate. This would make the entire Wars of the Roses a brutal 30-year conflict over which family had the true bloodline, a fight based on a complete genetic lie. The entire House of York, which claimed the throne based on this paternal line, would have no claim at all. The 2014 team, led by Dr. Turi King, presented both possibilities with equal weight. They concluded that the break could have happened anywhere in the 19 generations. They couldn't pinpoint it. The science at the time was not advanced enough to know which Y chromosome was the real Plantagenet one and which was the break. By being so cautious, they effectively revised the discovery's impact. They softened the blow. They buried the lead. What most people do not realize is that this vagueness allowed the world to focus on the good news. We found the king, and to treat the Y chromosome mismatch as a quirky, unsolvable footnote. It was just too explosive. It questioned the legitimacy of the entire York dynasty and by extension the Tudor dynasty that followed. The implications were so vast, so disturbing, that the scientific community just let it sit. Everyone was obsessed with the fact that modern science had found a king. But what they missed was that the same science had also proven that he wasn't a king, at least not by the rules he himself lived and perished by. The truth is, these false paternity events are not rare. Modern genetic studies estimate they happen in about 1 to 2% of births per generation. Over 500 years and 19 generations, the probability of at least one such event occurring becomes very, very high. But this wasn't just any family. This was the royal family where legitimacy was everything. This discovery adds a layer of delicious irony to Richard's story. His own claim to the crown was based on declaring his nephews, the princes in the tower, illegitimate, and now his own DNA revealed the entire concept was flawed from the start. For 10 years, that is where the story sat until now. The 500-year-old rumor is confirmed. For a decade, the royal scandal was history's hottest cold case. The data sat there, a ticking time bomb, just waiting for technology to catch up. And in 2025, it finally did. A new independent team at the University of Leicester, working with geneticists from Harvard and the Max Planck Institute, launched the Royal Bloodline Genomic Reanalysis Project. They weren't just retesting Richard's bones, they were going to pinpoint that break once and for all. The technology they used was science fiction compared to 2014. They used new long-read sequencing methods which can read massive unbroken strands of DNA instead of just the tiny, shattered fragments from before. They also used advanced proteomic analysis, which studies the ancient proteins in the bones, and new epigenetic mapping, which can reveal traits from a person's lifetime. So here is the deal. The new team needed more data points. Richard's Y chromosome was X. The modern Somerset's Y chromosome was Y. They were different. The original team didn't know which one was the true Plantagenet line. To solve this, the new team needed another undisputed ancient male line relative. They needed a control sample. They got permission from Westminster Abbey to take a tiny microscopic sample from the tomb of John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster. John of Gaunt was the son of King Edward III and the uncle of Richard II. Crucially, he lived and perished before the suspected break in the line could have ever happened. His DNA would be the Rosetta Stone. The team also ran a much deeper, more complex analysis on the living Somerset descendants, tracing their Y chromosome back generation by generation, looking for any signs of a break. The results came in and they were a bombshell. First, the deep analysis of the modern Somerset family proved with 99.9% certainty that their Y chromosome line was unbroken all the way back to the 15th century. This made possibility 1, the safe explanation, almost impossible. The break was not on their side of the family. Then the team tested the new ancient sample from John of Gaunt. The computer crunched the data, and get this, his Y chromosome perfectly matched the modern-day Somerset's. The crazy part is, this was the smoking gun. It proved that the Somerset line was the true original Plantagenet male bloodline. Therefore, the different Y chromosome, the one that didn't match, was Richard III's. The break had to have happened in Richard's immediate family tree. The new 2025 study didn't just suggest this, it proved it. The false paternity event happened between Richard's grandfather, Richard Earl of Cambridge, and Richard himself. The historical spotlight now fell with blazing intensity on one person, Richard, Duke of York, Richard III's father. And the new data suggests his mother was hiding a secret that would change the world. The false father. And suddenly, a 500-year-old rumor clicked into place. During the Wars of the Roses, enemies of the House of York spread a vicious rumor. They claimed that Richard, Duke of York, was not the son of the Earl of Cambridge. They claimed his mother, Cecily Neville, had an affair while her husband was away at war. They even named the supposed father a handsome English archer named Blayborn. At the time, this was dismissed as political mudslinging. It was just a nasty story to weaken the Yorkist claim. But the 2025 DNA analysis proves that rumor was in all likelihood true. Richard, Duke of York, the man who started the Wars of the Roses by claiming his blood was purer than the king's, was illegitimate. This changes more than one king's story. It rewrites the entire dynasty. The end of the bloodline. So let us just really talk about this down to earth. No complex academic jargon, no dusty textbook language. Let's just sit down and process what this all means. Because if you are watching this, you are probably asking the same questions we are. Is this all just speculation? Is this just another what-if scenario? Did this happen overnight? Are we missing a key detail? You are wondering if this is just another conspiracy theory cooked up on a late-night internet forum. The thing is, this isn't speculation anymore. That is the terrifying part. The 2025 study that dropped, it wasn't a theory, it wasn't a suggestion, it wasn't a fascinating possibility. It was hard, cold, unfeeling genetic data. This is the final, unvarnished truth. This is the truth that was so disturbing, so foundation-shattering, that the 2014 study had to dance around it. You remember that back in 2014, when Richard III's body was found, the scientists hinted at a complication. They noted a break in the Y chromosome line somewhere. They made it sound like a mild administrative error, a genealogical typo lost to time. They suggested it could have happened anywhere in 19 generations. They made it palatable. They made it safe. But the 2025 study, this was the uncensored version. This was the director's cut. This was the version they were too afraid to publish a decade ago. This study didn't just find a break, it pinpointed the break. And the implications are staggering. They don't just rewrite a line in a history book, they tear the whole book apart. The lie that built a dynasty. Here is the bombshell, plain and simple. The 2025 data proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that Richard, Duke of York, the man who started the Wars of the Roses, the father of two kings, was not the son of his supposed father, Richard of Konigsberg, the Earl of Cambridge. Genetically, they are strangers. This means Richard, Duke of York, the patriarch of the entire Yorkist dynasty, was illegitimate. His mother, Cecily Neville, was pregnant with a child that was not her husband's. He may have been the son of a phantom archer, a nameless courtier, or a passing soldier. We will never know who the biological father was. We only know who it wasn't. And if the Duke of York had no claim, what does that mean for his children? It means his son, King Edward IV, the handsome, popular, charismatic warrior king who charged into battle and took the throne, had absolutely no genetic right to it. Zero. None. It means Edward's sons, the tragic princes in the tower, the two little boys who were locked away and vanished from history. From a purely genetic and legal standpoint, they were illegitimate heirs. The Tudor blackmail. Historians and researchers are now forced to ask new what-if questions. And these questions sound like something out of a soap opera, but they are now terrifyingly plausible. Let's look at the Cecily Neville mastermind theory. What if Richard, Duke of York's mother, the famously beautiful and pious Cecily Neville, the Rose of Raby, knew her son was illegitimate? The official story has her husband, the Earl of Cambridge, away on campaign while she conveniently gives birth to a healthy son, Richard. But what if this was a calculated deception from the very beginning? What if she faked the birth entirely? This new data makes a fringe theory suddenly mainstream, the peasant bassinet theory. What if her husband was away and she, desperate to secure her husband's line and more importantly her own power and survival, simply acquired a child? What if she swapped in a healthy baby from a local peasant or a servant, passed it off as her own, and raised him as the heir? In this version, Cecily Neville isn't a passive victim of fate or a simple adulterer. She is a calculating political mastermind, a medieval Cersei Lannister who understood that in the Game of Thrones, you win or you get pushed aside. This new evidence paints a terrifying portrait of a woman who may have single-handedly set the stage for the entire war with a single desperate lie. Here is another one, the double bastard theory. What if King Edward IV, the big, handsome, womanizing son of the illegitimate Duke of York, knew? What if he knew deep down that his entire claim was built on sand? Think about it. His own brother, Richard III, famously claimed that Edward had signed a pre-contract of marriage to another woman, Lady Eleanor Butler, before he married the Queen, Elizabeth Woodville. This was Richard's whole legal argument for taking the throne. He claimed this pre-contract made Edward's marriage to the Queen invalid, which in turn made their children, the princes in the Tower, illegitimate. So, knowing all this, do you think the current royal family should be worried about their own DNA tests? Or is history just a game of who can tell the best lie? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this mystery, hit that like button and subscribe for more.